The year was 519 BCE. In the sprawling palace complex of Pepololis, a young girl named Arte was celebrating what would unknowingly be her final birthday as a child. She was 12 years old, the daughter of the most powerful man on earth, heir to luxuries that most could only dream of. Golden bangles jingled on her wrists, silk from far. Off-lands draped her shoulders, and servants hovered around her, ready to fulfill her every whim. From the outside looking in, her life was pure perfection, privilege, protection, and luxury, all rolled into one. But inside, Arte wasn't celebrating. She sat in the women's quarters, hands shaking as her mother carefully applied ceremonial makeup, like she was performing a sacred ritual. Dark kohl lined her eyes, making them look bigger, more grown-up. Rouge painted her lips deep crimson, and perfumed oils were massaged into her skin until she shined like a polished statue. Every brush stroke, every touch, was deliberate trance, forming her from a child into something else. Her mother didn't say a word. Her face was a mask of control, hiding any hint of the storm brewing underneath. When the preparations were done, she stepped back and studied Arte like she was memorizing every detail of her daughter's face. Then came the words that would haunt Arte forever. "Tonight your father will summon you. You will go to his chambers. You will do whatever he requires. No fear, no resistance, no emotion except gratitude, you understand." Arte nodded, though she didn't fully grasp what was coming. She'd watched older sisters disappear from the women's quarters at a certain age, only to return hours, or sometimes days later, their eyes carrying something broken. She had seen the pattern repeat itself, cold and mechanical, but she thought she was his daughter. That should mean some protection, right? Some line even absolute power wouldn't cross. What Arte didn't know was that she was about to enter a system so twisted, so corrupt, it would shock even Persia's enemies when they eventually learned the truth. Being the daughter of Xerxes, the King of Kings, ruler of an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to India, offered zero protection from a man who claimed dominion over every living soul in his borders. Hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to see will change how you think about power, corruption, and how far humans can sink when they're handed absolute authority. This isn't just ancient history. It's a case study in how civilizations can normalize the unthinkable if it serves the people in charge. Comment below what you already know about the Persian Empire, because I promise you, the reality inside those palace walls will shatter every assumption you've had about royalty. Before we get to the horror of what Xerxes did to his daughters, we need to understand the man himself, and the empire that made him untouchable. Xerxes was born into the bloodline of kings, son of Darius the Great, grandson of Cyrus the Conqueror, the guy who built the Persian Empire through military genius and ruthless expansion. Born in 518 BC, Xerxes inherited an empire spanning 3 continents and controlling the lives of millions. But being a Persian king wasn't just about political clout. These guys claimed direct descent from Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of their Zoroastrian faith. Not metaphorically, literally. They believed royal blood had divine essence. Kings were gods walking among mortals, and their desires were sacred commandments no one could question. Basically, if the king wanted something, it was automatically right. When Darius died in 486 BC, Xerxes had to fight for his throne. Persian succession wasn't automatic. You had to prove divine favor, outmaneuver rivals, and, well, make some of them disappear. Xerxes had older half, brothers with legit claims, but he had 2 big advantages. His mom, Atossa, was Cyrus the Great's daughter, giving him the purest royal bloodline, and he was ruthless, ready to crush anyone in his way. After a brutal 2-year power struggle filled with mysterious accidents and vanished rivals, Xerxes became the undisputed King of Kings in 484 BC. But there was one big shadow hanging over him. His dad had failed spectacularly in Greece at Marathon in 490 BC, Persian invincibility, not so much. If kings were gods, how could mortals beat them? Xerxes was obsessed with answering that question, and he planned to do it in the biggest, most over-the-top military campaign the world had ever seen. While building bridges across the Hellespont and organizing armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands, Xerxes was also consolidating power at home. He inherited hundreds of women from his dad's harem, but that wasn't enough. He also claimed his own daughters. Sure, it wasn't entirely unheard of for Persian kings to sleep with family, but Xerxes made it a full-on system. What had once been an occasional hush thing became routine, expected, and justified by religion. If royal blood was divine, keeping it pure meant, well, extreme measures. In Xerxes' world, keeping royal blood pure wasn't just a rule, it was an obsession. Brothers married sisters, fathers could claim daughters, all to keep the divine essence locked in the tiniest possible circle, instead of diluting it with marriages to commoners or nobles who didn't have direct royal blood. But let's be real, this complicated religious explanation was just a cover-up for something far darker. Xerxes claimed his daughters simply because he could. Absolute power meant that nobody, not even his own children, was beyond his reach. Showing control over his own family sent a crystal, clear message. Resisting the king's will was impossible, even for those who shared his blood. Persian culture already gave fathers insane authority over their kids, especially daughters, who were primarily seen as tools for political alliances and reproduction. But Xerxes didn't stop at marriage arrangements. He took that authority to the extreme, using his daughters' bodies for his own desires before deciding how to deploy them for political gain. Girls in Xerxes' palace learned this slowly, like a creeping horror. They watched older sisters disappear from the women's quarters at puberty, understanding without anyone spelling it out that the same fate awaited them. Some mothers tried to prep their daughters, carefully using euphemisms and teaching survival strategies. Others stayed silent, either hoping ignorance might protect their kids, or simply because words failed. The palace eunuchs, the eunuchs who ran the harem, were masters at preparing princesses for the king's attention. They knew exactly how Xerxes liked his daughters presented, bathed until their skin gleamed, scented with oils that pleased his senses, dressed in clothes that revealed more than they covered, styled to make them look older than they were. When a daughter was summoned, it followed a ritualized pattern designed to turn childhood innocence into something else entirely. Cosmetics were applied with meticulous precision. Jewelry was chosen to emphasize emerging curves, and fabrics were selected to move in ways that captured the king's attention. Every detail was calculated to maintain the illusion that this horrifying process was somehow natural and appropriate. This psychological prep was just as brutal as the physical. Daughters were coached on proper behavior, trained to show excitement instead of fear, and taught to express gratitude for royal attention. They were reminded over and over. Their bodies existed to serve the king, resistance was forbidden, and refusal could bring consequences not only for themselves but for their mothers and siblings. What's chilling is how systematic this all was. Xerxes' abuse wasn't some uncontrollable impulse. It was a fully institutionalized system, supported by ritual, justified by religion, and normalized within the court. The daughters had no advocates, no protection, no escape. Their mothers were powerless, bound to the same king who ruled their lives. The eunuchs served only the king. Nobles who might have spoken up were either complicit in similar acts or too scared to risk challenging the king. What went on behind the closed doors of Xerxes' chambers remains mostly hidden, but scraps of testimony from court officials, diplomatic letters, and references in Greek accounts give enough detail. Xerxes treated his daughters like concubines or slaves, ignoring their age. Family ties, or capacity to understand what was happening, The aftermath was always the same. Girls returned broken, innocence destroyed, trauma marking them for life. Some withdrew entirely. Others survived through dissociation, mentally separating themselves from their bodies. A few convinced themselves it was normal, or even honorable, but all were damaged and all understood their suffering had only just begun. The horror didn't end with the first encounter. Daughters who survived soon realized they weren't being protected. They were assets to be used over and over until the king chose to discard them for political gain. Some were summoned regularly, rotating in the king's system of available women. They'd get the dreaded notice from a palace anuck, knowing they had hours to prepare for another encounter. This unpredictability created its own kind of psychological torture, never knowing when the next summons would come, always anticipating trauma, never safe, even in the women's quarters that were supposed to be a sanctuary. Others were called only occasionally, depending on the king's whims. The uncertainty, did I anger him, did I fall from favor, haunted them endlessly, preventing closure or recovery. The most devastating part of Xerxes' system, how it shattered the father-daughter bond. These girls couldn't seek comfort from their father, because the man who should have been their protector had become their biggest threat. To survive, many developed extreme psychological coping mechanisms. Some dissociated completely during encounters, mentally leaving their bodies, retreating into private inner worlds. They'd stare at fixed points on the walls, recite prayers or poetry silently, or invent elaborate fantasy worlds in their minds to escape the nightmare in front of them. Some daughters survived by fully surrendering to the system. They convinced themselves that eager compliance might ease their suffering or even score them small favors, hoping that performing perfectly could make future encounters less brutal. They studied their father obsessively, learning every preference, every way to present themselves that might keep him satisfied. A few tried a different approach, maintaining some sense of control by framing themselves as willing participants rather than victims. They told themselves their service was a duty as princesses, that enduring suffering was for the greater good of the empire, that their sacrifices supported political stability. This mental reframing gave them a shred of dignity and purpose, but it came at the cost of facing the grim reality of what was happening. Then there were the daughters who broke completely. These girls became catatonic, refusing food, refusing